Hello musicians, buckydurddle here. Welcome back. I'm doing another tutorial on VCV rack modules. These are open source modules for VCV rack. Today I'm doing Bogaudio's XCO module, which is this guy right here. I can zoom in and let you see. The XCO module right here, it's a VCO. It's a very cool VCO. So we're going to go over all the things that make this one work today and see about how we might be able to use it for your music. This is not the first Bogaudio tutorial I've done. I've done several other Bogaudio tutorials on their modules, and of course many tutorials on VCV rack. So be sure to check those out on utopian.io. You'll find lots of cool stuff there, how to make your music. Okay, so first of all, let me just do a little bit of setup. I'll tell you how I got this set up, and then I'll tell you what we're going to do. First of all, I'm running Core Audio's audio interface right here. Beside that, going into the interface, I have Fundamentals Mixer, which is right here, you can see. And I have the mono mix out going to two inputs left and right in the audio interface from Core. So, and then input 2 I've got going over to XCO. So that's going from mix out over to in. Now I have a couple of scopes here, as you can see. And as you know from my other tutorials, I love scopes because they show us what's going on in our music. Not only just to hear it, but actually so we can see what's going on as well. So it gives us a lot of understanding of what's going on in our music. Now I have VCO, which is another Bogaudio module right here. VCO is beside XCO. I have it for comparison because VCO and XCO are very closely related. I'm also going to be using VCO today for one of its functions, which is really cool, but I'll talk to you about it later. But it has a function that I really like, and we will use it. I'll show you how that works a little later. I also have a trigger right here, which is by AS modules, and this is their trigger Mark 1, and that's a really cool trigger. I use it from time to time for different things, and it's really cool. Just the simple little trigger. So I'll show you what I'm going to use that for a little later. I'm running a sequencer down here that I really love, and you've seen it before in other tutorials. Skorovnik by Koraflex. This is a great sequencer. I really like it. I've used a lot of sequencers in here in VCV rack, and I have to say this is my favorite. It's not really straightforward, and I've not done a tutorial on this sequencer. Because it's so good, and I want to make sure that I do it justice. So I haven't done a tutorial on this yet, but I will. It's a really great sequencer. It does a lot of stuff. But I'll talk to you about that later. But I'm using a very basic sequence in here that's going to be triggering, that's going to be feeding into our XCO module for giving us some sound. I'm also going through a JW modules quantizer, which is here, and I've got a C scale pentatonic chosen to get us some nice sounds. Okay, so now let's get started. What I'm going to do today, I'm going to go through the functionality of XCO, the voltage control oscillator, or VCO. I'm going to go through all the functionality of this. I'll be comparing it to a VCO, which is beside it. That's this guy right here, because they're very, very similar. All the functions of VCO are also contained in XCO, but XCO gives us a few other options. So depending on what your processor speed is and what your power, what your needs are, you may want to go with VCO instead of XCO. I don't know, but I'll tell you why as we do this. Now I'm going to go through all of these functions here. I'm going to go through all the interface you see, what it does, why it does it. And I'm going to show you on the scope how it's actually, like what's actually happening when you actually change different things here. So I'm going to go over all of these things so you're going to understand it all. Now, what I'm going to encourage you to do is to test yourself as you do this. As I do something here, I think you should do the same. I think you should open up an instance of rack and try the things I do. And I'll remind you as we go through this tutorial, I'll remind you from time to time that you could probably try this now, okay, and see if you get the same results. So before we get started, I'd like for you to go to my GitHub repository and download this file. I've saved this file for you. I've saved it over here as a file called You can see, you might be able to see it. No, you can't see it. It's at the top here. It's called XCO tutorial. So you can download this work file, and it will give you exactly the layout you see here. And then you can start doing the things as I do as you do it. So test yourself. Okay, let's get started. First of all, XCO is a VCO. It's a voltage-controlled oscillator. Now, an oscillator is something that creates sound waves. It creates waves. So it oscillates up and down, up and down, up and down. As you simplify it, it just creates waves. Now, waves can be all kinds of things, and for this oscillator, the waves can be, we can make them as sound waves. So you can see here on our scope, we have waveforms. And if I turn up my volume over here on mixer, you can see it's creating a sound wave. And as I move my dial up and down here, we're able to change that sound wave. Now that's an oscillator. That's just what an oscillator does. Now, all oscillators will do this sort of thing. If I move over here to VCO, which is another oscillator, it would produce the same effect. I'm going to change this. Here we go. So you see that I can create sound with this oscillator. It's creating waves, and the waves are turned into sound. Now I'm going to connect my scope back up again so you can see that I'm not only just hearing it, but you can actually see that there's actually sound. And as I change this, or if I change the parameters of my wave, I'll get different, I'll be able to get different results. Okay, but it's an oscillator. Okay, now, let me turn down my volume, and I'm going to show you a little practice that you might want to try. Might want to do, like, set for yourself that you do all the time whenever you are working. When I first start with the module, right out of the box, I initialize it. So I right-click or two-finger tap on a Mac, or whatever you need to do, control-click, and I get initialize. I get this little sub-menu. All modules in Rack have this, but I'm going to initialize, and that puts all the settings back to the initial state right out of the box. Okay, so I just did that, so now we're back to normal. So this is a VCO. This is an oscillator, so it's going to make sounds. Now, oscillators generally, out of the box, they tend to make four sounds. They make a sine wave. They make as you can see right here, you can see there's a sine wave out on VCO. They make a triangle wave, which is right here, you can see. They make a saw right here, and they make a square wave. Now over on XCO, you can see the same thing. We have a square right here. We have a saw right here, our triangle wave, and our sine wave. So this also produces 4 different waveforms. So on my sound here, down on the bottom, you can see that the 4 waveforms have outs for each. So if I want to get a sine wave, I can just hit that guy with my input. Turn up a little bit. You can hear we have a sine wave. If I move over to the other output, I get my triangle, saw, and square. So all 4 of those waveforms I can take them as independent outs. Now the really cool thing about this one, this oscillator, I really like, is that I can actually take individual outs at the same time. So you can see I have 2 outs. See that? Or maybe I'll move over here so you can see. I have a square wave out coming here, and I have a triangle right here coming, or sorry, saw wave right here coming out. Now they're both connected to the same frequency. So if I, as I change my frequency, or if I have an input frequency from something like a sequencer, the frequency will stay the same. And if I just hit play down here on my sequencer on the bottom, and I'll turn my volume a little, I don't have my outputs connected. Let's go to mix. Oh, sorry, I'm in my wrong. There you go. So you can hear that there's we have sound coming, and you can see there's 2 separate waveforms coming out at the same time. Okay, I'm gonna turn it down. So that's a real nice feature, being able to take 2 separate waveforms out at the same time. I'm gonna stop that. Okay, next let's look at some of the interface here for XCO. Now that we know that we can take 4 separate waves out, which you can do on some other oscillators and some you can't, but let's move to some of the interface. Now, VCO and XCO both have this frequency dial here. And the frequency dial, it changes our voltage. Let's get some sound going here again. So you can see we can change our sound here. Now, what Bogaudio has done is, if you put it on 0, it gives us a C, and then you can change the C as you from the C, like so by just going default at 0 volts, it's producing a C for us. Now VCO over here is the same; it has the same type of deal. You can also fine tune it with this. I'm going through this stuff quickly because this is found on almost every oscillator. So we have our big changes for the frequency and our small changes. Okay, now next down below you see slow. Now you might say, okay, I don't know what that is. When I click it, I'm not hearing anything. Now you don't, because that changes our oscillator into an LFO, a low frequency oscillator. Now I have VCO here, so I'm going to take VCO. I'll take a sine wave out. I'll go into here, and I'll turn this guy to slow. Now let's turn this up. So now you can hear that we have a fluctuating frequency. I'm going to turn the volume down now. So what's happened here is the VCO or XCO, when you click slow, it drops the frequency of the waveform you're creating 7 octaves. Okay, it drops it down 7 octaves. So you can see on the scope here, our frequency is changing quite a bit. Now let me just demonstrate something else. let me just disconnect this guy. Now I'm going to take a sine wave out, a nice clean sine wave. I'm going to put it into this here. There you go. Now this is a regular sine wave. It's playing a C, okay, because our voltage is on 0. But now if I click slow, you'll see that now look at the oscillations. It's very, very slow. I'll adjust my time on my scope, and you'll see that, look, these oscillations are very slow now. Very, very slow. As opposed to if I turn it back to normal, an audible oscillator, you can see, look at that, the waveform is super fast. So this would be something you could hear. And if I hit slow, it's something you can't. So you can actually use XCO and VCO as either an audible VCO, voltage control oscillator, or an LFO, low frequency LFO, a low frequency oscillator. Now, the low frequency oscillator is for control voltages. Okay, now I'm not going to get into that. I've done other tutorials on LFOs. I'm not going to get into what an LFO is, but the fact is that it's not meant to be heard. It's a controller, so it's a control voltage. But it's nice that we have the option to be able to use this for that. So by clicking slow, it will actually drop the frequency 7 octaves. Okay, there you go. Now let's continue on. So then below this, we have frequency modulation. And the frequency modulation, you can control the frequency, as you just heard, using an LFO. I'll turn this down low volume so you can hear. So we have an LFO here controlling our frequency. Now, this FM dial here, this is the amount of modulation that's going to happen. So if I turn up a little bit, you can see on the board here, we have on the scope, we have a little bit of fluctuation. If I crank this up a little bit more, it gives us that much more. If I do all the way to the top, it's crazy. Okay, so that's that. Now, you can also control the amount of, this is the depth of frequency modulation. This depth can be controlled through this here as well. So we can connect this to we can actually control our, the depth that would be this dial can be controlled with an LFO as well. Okay, so let me just turn this down again. Okay, so that's that. Now, we have the ability to, as you see, we have the ability to control our frequency with an LFO. We can also control, if we want that frequency to be a linear control, the frequency modulation to be controlled linearly or exponentially. Now, I've done this in other tutorials as well, but this is a mathematical thing. Exponential graph would swing wildly, as you can see. A linear graph is much more linear. So you can see that with the fluctuations are very controlled. equally up and down in a linear fashion. But you can look up what exponential and linear is mathematically yourself. I'm not going to get into it here because I've done it with other tutorials, so I'm not going to repeat myself too much here. Okay, so that's that guy. Now, we have, down here at the bottom, we have voltage per octave, which we are coming in from. We can use voltage per octave to control the frequency. We use frequency modulation, but we can also use this guy here to control our frequency. And I'm using my sequencer in here. I'll just disconnect this guy now. I'm using my frequency. I'm using my sequencer to control the pitch. So if I click run on my sequencer down here, so now through voltage per octave, this right here, you can see that the sequencer is controlling it. So the sequencer is I have pitches designated here on the sequencer, and those through voltage per octave are being, the XCO is outputting the proper voltage per note per octave. Okay, and again, we've gone over that in other tutorials as well. Now I'm going to disconnect this guy. Actually, no, I'm just going to stop this. Stop. There we go. Okay, so now we have a pitch. Now, what I want to do next, I want to show you the next one, sync. Now, this is a hard sync. Now, you may say, what does hard sync mean? Okay, one second. Let me get this going over here. It'll be easier to show you with. Now, let's just show you here. Now, I have a I switched to LFO so I can get a nice slow a slow wave that I can show you very clearly. Actually, I'll tell you what. Let's go to sine wave out because it's easier to show you with sine wave. I didn't need to connect my output audio, but that's okay. Now, what a hard sync means is it resets your waveform to 0. Okay, now you can try this. This is one of these examples where you can try this yourself. If you set up scope and you use your sine wave and you crank your time level down so you can actually see your LFO waveform nice and clear. And if you connect up the trigger here, and if you hit it, you'll see that it changes the wave. It brings the wave right on the 0 line. So it basically restarts the wave. So every time I hit this momentary switch, 3, 2, 1, click, it resets the wave. It starts the wave at 0. Now, that's important because, let me connect another guy over here, another guy over here, another guy over here. So now they're all running. Now, if they happen to get out of sync so that they're not working correctly, as soon as I hit my momentary switch, it brings everything at 0 and it starts everything at the beginning of the waveform. So it makes everything exactly in phase. All right. Now, you're going to see a little bit about why that's important a little bit later. But you can try that yourself. You can set up your scope and hit the momentary switch, and you'll see that it will stop the waveform and start it right at 0. Now, you might say to yourself, Bucky, I don't understand why that's so important. But when sounds start to sound weird, as you run your software for a while, internal clocks and things, it might get out of shape, and then before you know it, you're not getting the sound that you wanted to have. So, it's important to make sure that you have. It's important to make sure that you have exactly the waveform as you want to get the sound you're after. You can't just leave it to chance. And if the clocks drift a little bit off, this hard sync will start things over again and put you right back where you need to be. Okay, let's move on. Next thing, we said earlier that we had outs for every waveform, and that can be really useful because you may want to send certain outs to different devices, different modules, a reverb or maybe another kind of filter or processor of some sort. You can do that. So those outs are really nice. We also have a mix out right here. Now what the mix out does, it gives you a combination of all of these waveforms at the same time. Now let's have a look at that. I'm going to connect my scope to mix out. I'm going to connect my output to mix out. And I'm going to move over and turn my volume up a little bit. All right, I'm still on LFO mode. I'm on slow mode right here. See slow? So I'll click that so we'll get an actual tone. Let me turn this down a little. Okay, and I'll turn my time back up so I can see my waveform a little clearer. Now, right now, oh, I'm sorry, I have to go to mix right here. You see these mix dials, right here, the 4 mix dials? This is how much of the signal for this wave is going to the mix. So if I take it all the way down, all of them down, now none of them are going to the mix. If I turn up my sine wave, you'll see it gives us a nice little simple sine wave. And if I bring up my triangle, same deal. So you get the idea. But let's say if I bring up my sine wave, then I bring up saw. You see it's starting to bring a second waveform in there. See that? So now they're affecting each other. Or if I have my sine and I bring in my square, it starts to give different effects. Okay, and triangle, or sorry, saw, and then we have our triangle, same deal. So you will get different effects as you bring in different waves. Now, that can be extremely exciting for creating new sounds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run my little sequence, and let's just play a little bit with this and see what we get. I'm going to turn up my volume a little bit. Now, let's just see how this works. So if I turn up my, let's bring it, well, right now this is a sine wave. Let's bring in some triangle. You bring in some saw as well. Take out some triangle. Take out some of this sine wave. Bring in some square. Okay, so you can see that we can very quickly make something really exciting and new, a new sound of our own. All right. Now, that's cool as you're combining the standard waves, but we also have some effects. Each wave has its own. Let me just show you these now. I'm going to turn up my volume a little, and I'm going to stop my sequence. All right, so now we're given, here's our wave, the last one our sequence played. I'm going to initialize, and I'm going to turn down each of these mixer selections. Okay, now, each one of these waveforms has its own unique effect that we can control. Now, we're only given one, so it's a little limited, but it's great. Right out of the box, it's great. And you can try this at home yourself. I mean, if you want to try these things, you can experiment with this. Now, let's try the square wave. I'll bring square wave up to max. Now we have PW, that's pulse width. So you can see we have pulse width modulation going on here. That also can be controlled by an LFO. You see? So my LFO, I'm using my VCO as my LFO. And depending on how much I dial this down or up, it's controlling how much of the LFO is affecting the pulse width. Okay? So that's the square wave and pulse width modulation. Let's turn that guy down. Next, let's look at the triangle wave and what it has for a filter. Now, triangle wave, we have saturation. Let's just have a look at that, and we'll listen to it as well. Triangle wave is a saturation, so if we turn it up, you'll see that it kind of wants to become a... Oops, sorry, I'm listening to the wrong wave here now. Here we go, and turn this guy off, and turn that guy off. And now we're listening to, let's listen to a unsaturated saw wave. There you go. Now if I turn up saturation, you can see that it turns it almost into a square wave. So that's saturation. Now the next one, let's look at our triangle wave, and the triangle gives us sample and hold. Now sample and hold can be a tutorial in itself. Sample and hold can be a complex thing, but basically, in a nutshell, it takes a small portion of the waveform and repeats it. It holds it and repeats it. So as we do this, it turns it into a step waveform. You can see it, like this is a 16 step, and it goes down 8 and 4, and it goes right on down to a couple of steps. So very cool, and it can sound really good in a sequence. Let me just play our sequence and have a listen to that. So there's lots of options you can do with that guy too. So that's a really cool thing. That's sample and hold. And then finally, our sine wave has feedback. And feedback is when the wave itself is taken and repeated back on itself, fed back on itself, hence the term feedback. You can play with that. Now these are very simple. These are very simple filters, but they do work, and they can provide you with some great options for creating your music. Okay, so now let's move on to this next row down here. This is phase. Now, in order to show you this one, I'm going to connect my triangle and my sine wave. And I'm going to turn both of these guys up, and we'll turn up our volume a little bit so we can hear it. Now, right now, as you can see on our scope, and I'll zoom in so you can really see clearly, on our scope, both of these waves are perfectly in phase. They're playing exactly this, they're starting their cycle exactly the same point in time. When I move the phase of, let's say, the triangle wave, you can see it's moving off. You see that? It's moving off out of phase. I can go negative or I can go positive. So you can see. Now, if I can do that with other waves too. Now, I'm showing you the effect of what it looks like when they're two separate waves, because I'm taking it out from my triangle and out from my sine wave. And you can try this at home as well yourself. But if I take my mix out, you'll see that, oops, I gotta change my time here. There we go. You'll see that as I change my phase, it drastically changes the wave shape. So you can get some really interesting wave shapes here. Now let's bring in our saw, and then we can change the phase of our saw, and change the phase of the triangle, and you can change the phase of the sine wave too. You can bring in some square wave, and change the phase of that, and our pulse width. So now all of a sudden we have a lot of different things we can do. We can make some really interesting wave shapes. And if I run my sequencer again, you start to get some really interesting sounds. Using these effects now we're able to use these three different sounds to get some really interesting things. So I'm going to zoom back out again so we're not too close. Using all of these options here, we're able to get some really interesting sounds. That's not to mention controlling these with voltage control, like our LFO. We can control all of these parameters. Our pulse width can be controlled, saturation, sample and hold, feedback. Also, our phase for every one of these can be changed. A nice little thing you might want to try is controlling your phase, one of your phases, with a very slow moving oscillator, a low frequency oscillator. That will just gradually bring things out of phase and back in phase again. Can we have some really interesting effects? Anyway, you can try that at home too. Very cool stuff. So that is basically everything about Bogaudio's XCO oscillator. Very cool. We've covered pretty much everything on it. And as you can see, I'm just showing you the technical things about how it can be used. You now can take it and apply all these things to your own music. So go to my GitHub repository, and it's linked in this post. Download this VCV rack file, VCV file, and the XCO tutorial, and start building your own. Before you actually get it running, you're going to have to install the AS sample pack, which is right here, not sample pack, but module pack. You're going to have to install the Bogaudio, the fundamentals, the core. You're also going to have to install JW modules. These are all free, and also the Choral FX or Choral FX module pack as well. You get all those installed first, then download and start up open my XCO tutorial.vcv file, and then you can explore all the things I did in here. Okay, so there's nothing to it. You'll be making some great music in no time. Now, I'd love to hear about what you're doing as well, so feel free to contact me in this post. Leave a comment for me. You can also get me on utopian.io, Utopian's Discord channel as well. I'd be happy to hear about your music. I'd love to hear it. So feel free to contact me. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all next time.